Somewhere deep in the night, the king could not sleep. The air was still, yet his mind churned. He called for the royal records, the scrolls that held the stories of his reign. Servants carried them in, their footsteps echoing on the polished stone. As the fire crackled and the scrolls unfurled, one detail emerged from the ink, a forgotten act of loyalty. And that single moment would begin to unravel a deadly plot and set the stage for one young woman's act of courage that would save an entire nation. The Book of Esther is set in the royal courts of Persia during the reign of King Xerxes. It is the story of an orphaned Jewish girl, raised by her cousin Mordecai, who rose to the throne and found herself at the heart of a crisis. Her choice would mean life or death for her people. In the days when the Persian Empire stretched from India to Ethiopia, King Xerxes reigned with unmatched power. His palace at Susa was a symbol of wealth and dominance, filled with marble halls, golden pillars, and armies of servants who carried out his every command. Yet inside this kingdom of splendor, a hidden story was unfolding. One that would begin not in a palace, but in a modest Jewish home. Esther was an orphan, her parents having died while she was still young. Her cousin Mordecai, a devout Jew and minor official in the king's court, took her in and raised her as his own daughter. Under his care, Esther grew not only in beauty but in wisdom, modesty, and faith. Though she lived in exile far from the land of her ancestors, she carried within her the identity of God's chosen people. That identity, hidden for a time, would later shape the destiny of nations. The turning point came after Queen Vashti, Xerxes' first wife, was banished. She had refused to appear at a drunken royal feast to display her beauty before the king's nobles. And in an empire where the king's word was law, defiance could not be tolerated. Advisors urged Xerxes to make an example of her, so that all women in the kingdom would respect their husbands' commands. Vashti was cast aside, and the throne beside the king stood empty. In search of a new queen, officials were sent throughout the empire to gather young women of beauty and promise. Among those taken was Esther. She entered the harem of the palace, where each candidate underwent a long period of preparation, months of oils, perfumes, and training in royal etiquette. But Esther's true distinction was not in outward splendor alone. She won favor with all who met her, for she carried herself with grace and humility. Mordecai had instructed her not to reveal her Jewish identity, and she obeyed, blending into the Persian court, yet never forgetting the faith of her fathers. When at last Esther was brought before the king, something about her presence captured him. Out of all the women, he chose her as his queen. A crown was placed upon her head, and the daughter of exiles was seated beside the most powerful man on earth. She was perhaps only 16 years old, young, inexperienced, yet suddenly thrust into unimaginable influence. At the same time, Mordecai remained near the palace, keeping watch over Esther from a distance. One day, he overheard a plot by two of the king's officers who guarded the entrance. They conspired to assassinate Xerxes. Mordecai quickly reported this through Esther, and the plot was investigated and stopped. The incident was recorded in the royal chronicles, though Mordecai received no reward at that moment. That forgotten detail, written in ink and tucked away in the archives, would one day resurface at the most critical hour. For a season, peace and prosperity filled the palace. Esther's life seemed secure, and her people remained unnoticed within the vast empire. But hidden storms were gathering, and soon the young queen's quiet obedience would be tested beyond imagination. Among the king's advisors was a man named Haman, elevated above all the officials of the empire. He was an Agagite, a descendant of the Amalekites, ancient enemies of Israel. Pride burned within him, and he demanded honor from all who saw him. When Mordecai, faithful to his God, refused to bow before Haman, the insult cut deeply. To Haman, this was not merely personal defiance, it was the revival of an old rivalry between his people and the Jews. Instead of seeking revenge against Mordecai alone, Haman devised a far greater evil. He sought to annihilate the entire Jewish population scattered across the empire. Using deception, he told the king, "There is a certain people dispersed among the nations. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not obey the king's commands. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them." Appealing to Xerxes' pride and desire for order, Haman offered a vast sum of silver to ensure the plan was carried out. The king, unaware that his own queen was among those targeted, agreed. A decree was written and sealed with the king's signet ring, an irrevocable law in Persia. Couriers were sent to every province, announcing that on a set date all Jews, young and old, men, women, and children, were to be destroyed. Fear and mourning spread like wildfire as the Jewish people realized that their existence was scheduled for extinction. Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, standing at the palace gate in grief. Word reached Esther through her attendants, and she sent garments for him, but he refused to accept them. Instead, he sent back a message, urging her to go before the king and plead for her people. Esther hesitated. The law of the court was strict. Anyone who entered the king's presence without being summoned risked death unless the king extended his golden scepter. It had been 30 days since she was last called to him. To approach unbidden could cost her life. Mordecai's reply was piercing. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" These words awakened Esther's resolve. She answered, "Go, gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My attendants and I will fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish for 3 days." Prayers and fasting rose from the Jewish community. Mordecai and the people cried out to God. Even though his name is not mentioned in the text, his providence was sought in silence. Esther, meanwhile, prepared herself for the most dangerous step of her life. On the 3rd day, Esther clothed herself in royal garments and entered the inner court. The vast hall was filled with officials, but all eyes turned when the king saw her. In that moment, the decision of life or death rested in his hand. Yet his heart softened, and he extended the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched its tip. "What is it, Queen Esther?" he asked. "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." Rather than immediately reveal Haman's plot, Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet. There, surrounded by delicacies and wine, the king asked again what she desired. Esther, with calm wisdom, delayed once more. She invited them to return for a second banquet. It was not fear that restrained her, it was timing. She understood that the moment of revelation must coincide with God's providence. That very night, the king could not sleep. He ordered the book of Chronicles to be read aloud. The attendants came across the record of Mordecai exposing the assassination plot years earlier. Xerxes asked, "What honor has Mordecai received for this?" The reply came, "Nothing has been done for him." The oversight struck the king, and he resolved to honor Mordecai. At dawn, Haman entered the court, intending to ask for Mordecai's execution on gallows he had built. But before he could speak, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Believing the king meant him, Haman proposed an extravagant display: robes, a royal horse, and a public parade. To his horror, the king commanded him to do this for Mordecai. Haman himself was forced to lead the procession, declaring Mordecai's honor before the people. His humiliation was complete, yet worse still awaited him. That evening, at the second banquet, the king pressed Esther again. With steady courage, she spoke, "Grant me my life and spare my people, for we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." Shocked, the king asked who would dare commit such a crime. Esther turned and said, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." The king, enraged, left the room, and when he returned, he found Haman falling near Esther's couch, begging for mercy. Interpreting this as an assault, Xerxes ordered his execution. Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. But the decree of destruction still stood, sealed with the king's ring. Persian law could not be revoked. Instead, Xerxes gave Mordecai authority to write a new decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves against any who attacked them. On the appointed day, the Jews rose up, defended their families, and triumphed over their enemies. Mordecai was elevated to a position of honor, clothed in royal garments, and the Jewish people celebrated deliverance. From that time forward, they established the festival of Purim, a yearly remembrance of how God had turned sorrow into joy. The book of Esther reminds us that God's timing is never late. What feels hidden or forgotten is woven into his plan. One young woman's obedience became the deliverance of a nation, proving that no background, no circumstance can keep us from being used by him. Esther's courage whispers to us today, when the moment comes, stand firm, because God is already at work. If you'd like to hear more incredible Bible stories brought to life, be sure to subscribe to Volume of Bible Stories.